the community needs to be careful.
Democrat Esther Panich knows Israelis who've been impacted by this week's surprising and deadly attacks on Israel.
This is the largest loss of life for the Jewish community since the Holocaust. Maybe people will understand that.
As the Georgia General Assembly's only Jewish member, she's disappointed that a bill she sponsored last session to define anti-Semitism and enhance punishments for those who act on it failed. Anti-Semitic flyers have popped up in metro Atlanta neighborhoods on an alarmingly regular basis over the last year, and Panich says safeguards are needed now more than ever.
There is a direct correlation between what happens in the Middle East and attacks on Jews around the world, including here.
Lawmakers with ties to Georgia reacted to the deadly violence this week. Senator Raphael Warnock called the attacks disturbing and condemned all forms of terrorism. Senator John Ossoff, Georgia's first Jewish senator, pledged his full support to Israel. Representative Hank Johnson prayed for a quick end to the violence. And State Representative Ruah Roman, the first and only of Georgia's Palestinian lawmakers, condemned the violence also and called for an immediate ceasefire in a tweet on Saturday.
We are at war.
After a demonstration outside her office this weekend, Anat Sultan Dadon, the Israeli consulate general in the southeast region, said the attacks were unlike anything Israelis have ever seen.
These are situations that we have never been in before, and they need to be addressed so that we never see these sites again.
Also happening on Thursday, today, Thursday, October 12th, we are continuing our watch on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., as House Republicans are attempting to decide who will become the next Speaker of the House. Wednesday morning, U.S. Congressman Steve Scalise secured enough votes from his party's caucus to become the Republican nominee for Speaker of the House. However, widespread speculation is holding that Scalise does not have enough votes to actually win the speakership outright whenever the House votes as a full body. The Democratic Party is expected to nominate House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York to again become Speaker of the House, or attempt to secure the House speakership nomination. Republicans have a narrow majority in Congress, in the U.S. House, but again, Steve Scalise does not apparently have enough votes, 217 votes, needed to secure the next speakership of the U.S. House. We'll continue to be watching that as well. Closer to home, 1 week from tomorrow, the first ever trials in the Georgia election interference case emanating from Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis's historic indictment of former President Donald Trump and 18 of his Republican allies are expected to begin. We have confirmed that on Friday, October 20th, a total potential juror pool of 450 people have been summoned to appear at the Fulton County Courthouse to officially begin selecting a jury in the first two of these related cases, those being of Trump attorneys Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesbrough. Now, the courtroom of Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee has been very busy over the past couple of weeks, as attorneys for both Powell and Chesbrough have made a number of wide-ranging motions and legal maneuverings ahead of what will become the first trials ever related to a former president's alleged attempts to overturn a lawful election, that being the 2020 presidential election here in Georgia. Over the last several weeks, as I said, Scott McAfee's courtroom has been busy, and we will continue to monitor these upcoming historic trials that are set to begin in just less than 2 weeks. Another election-related development that we're watching late Wednesday afternoon, a U.S. federal court judge rejected attempts from President Joe Biden's Justice Department to overturn the Georgia Election Integrity Act, otherwise known as Senate Bill 202, that was passed a couple of years ago, right after the 2020 election. The Biden administration was argued that the bill was racially motivated and was an attempt to suppress minority voter participation in Georgia. However, a federal judge in the U.S. Northern District Court of Georgia was not convinced and said the Justice Department had really not proven its case that the bill and the election laws were racially discriminatory in any nature. It also noted that the bill allows many provisions supported by Democrats in terms of overall election security. Now, our political reporter, Doug Reardon, will be interviewing Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger for one of our later newscasts, either this evening or tomorrow or in future editions, because Secretary of State Raffensperger has been a strong proponent of what he calls the strongest election security laws in the nation. That's something that we'll be following. We'll also be working to get reaction from the American Civil Liberties Union, as this was one of the plaintiffs in the case that was seeking to prohibit the implementation of certain provisions of Georgia's election security or Georgia's Election Integrity Act that was passed a couple of years ago. Speaking of election security, the issue of artificial intelligence has become a watchword not only in American political society, but legal and social and cultural issues as well. Lawrence Norton works with the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University of Law. He is the co-author of a recent report called Artificial Intelligence and Election Security. Now, that report was released last week, and I had a conversation with him specifically as far as election security in Georgia, what election officials, not only here in Georgia but throughout the nation, need to be mindful of in terms of securing or preventing election interference from artificial intelligence, bots, or other forms of technology moving forward. Here's that interview.
The main thing is that artificial intelligence is already having an impact on the way we think about election security. There's no question that the recent greater availability of generative AI to the public means that there are lowered barriers to potentially interfere in elections. There are lowered barriers to amplifying false information. But the good news is, and we interviewed many election security experts and election officials for this report, that this is really a difference in kind in terms of the threat that election offices and vendors are facing, and not in the type of threat. And what that means is that many of the security recommendations that security experts have been offering to election officials and vendors, and that have been taken up to a large extent, are really what's going to protect our election systems going into 2024 and beyond. And if anything, what this new availability of generative AI should mean is that we really need to double down on these recommendations. While we've made a lot of progress in the last few years, I think the next year we've got to invest even more and make sure that the things that security experts have been recommending are in place going into the 2024 election. Absolutely not. I should be very clear about that. There's no question that artificial intelligence is going to be used to attempt to interfere in our elections. And in fact, Microsoft has a claim that it's already found that the Chinese have used artificial intelligence in spreading false election information. And I should be clear: generative AI is a tool, is an amplification tool for things like false information. And there's every reason to expect that those who have engaged in attempting to interfere in our election, particularly foreign powers like Russia, China, and Iran, will probably want to take advantage of artificial intelligence, and others that have been spreading false information about elections will probably do the same. But there's no evidence that any of that has actually impacted the outcome of an election. I certainly hope not. And I think we should be clear. There are in this article, we talk about a few different kinds of threats from artificial intelligence. So the first is just its ability to imitate the human voice, right? Whether that's actually literally the human voice, or it's through text, or through some kind of pictures, visual means. It can create new products that look like they're produced by humans. And there are two kinds of threats there that we identify in the article. One is it may make it easier for bad actors to try to trick people in election offices, people that are working at election vendors, into providing information that should be confidential. It may trick them into clicking onto links by sending phishing emails. There could be a fake audio that sounds like it's coming from somebody's boss asking for information. And there are protocols in place, even if somebody successfully breaches an election office that way, to ensure that that shouldn't mean that they can access information that they shouldn't have access to. There's something called multi-factor authentication, right? So when you go sign on to a new account, sometimes before you actually get in, they'll say, we're going to text you to your phone a code that you'll need to be able to get in. And we need that kind of multi-factor authentication. And it has expanded widely in election offices, and I think in vendors, but we really need that widespread everywhere. We've got a lot of resiliency in the election system. We have paper ballots almost everywhere at this point in the country. We're doing audits. There are steps that are largely in place, but we're not quite at 100%, that we need to get into every office to protect the election infrastructure, and to every vendor. And I think if that's the case, certainly in protecting the election infrastructure, we should be in very good place in the United States in 2024 and beyond. For the most part, I don't think that this is going to affect the voters' experience. So really, what I'm talking about is protecting the infrastructure itself from cyber attacks. Where I do think that artificial intelligence may impact the voter experience is on the information that they're getting. So, as I said, one of the dangers, I would say, that people are talking about when it comes to AI is it just makes it easier to imitate humans, often authoritative figures, without actually having the participation of those figures. So, people have used ChatGPT. ChatGPT, if you ask it to, can write an article for you on a particular subject. There are text-to-image forms of generative AI that allow you to tell a tool to create a picture, right? And we've seen some of this in political advertising already. There's an article of there's a picture that was put out by a campaign of Donald Trump hugging Anthony Fauci that was meant to discredit him. That it didn't actually happen. I think it also showed him kissing him or something like that. I think that's where the voter experience may change, and there may be, it just becomes easier to kind of spread false information, lies, over the internet through social media platforms. And I think the challenge for voters is going to be how to find accurate information, how to find authentic information. And that's also a change, I think, where that election offices are going to have to be engaged in. First of all, There's something called .gov. Often addresses will have a .com or a .net at the end, but the government offers a .gov address, and this is the one that's only given to government offices. And so, one of the things that we talk about in the article is there's a fear that, and this has happened to other kinds of agencies to scam people, that we'll start seeing fake addresses for election offices that might tell you the wrong information about where to vote, that might tell you the wrong information about when to vote. And one of the things that we can do to protect ourselves against that, and election offices can do, is sign up to .gov, because only the government can sign up to those. And then if somebody is directed to a site and it doesn't say .gov, then they'll know that they shouldn't trust it. Those kinds of things to make sure that we're authenticating accurate information. One of the other things that we recommend in the article is that people may start now turning to ChatGPT to give them information about the election. And one of the things that we would like to see ChatGPT and other AI developers do is say, you know what, we can't answer these questions. We're not, and they do say that now, we're not able to answer the question about when you can vote, where to vote. But we're going to direct you to the authoritative source, which is your local election office. Here's the site. They can give you the correct information. So I think all of us have a role to play in making sure that because the information environment is likely to unfortunately get even worse, that people know where to go to get truthful information. Well, if I could have two for election officials, they're quick though. One is just go back and look at everything that security experts have advised that you do in your offices, and in particular, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency of the federal government. There's some basic things that anybody that's doing an election office should do, and if you're not doing it, make sure that you are doing it. The other thing is, we know just from the past few elections already the kinds of false claims that are going to be made around our elections. There's a pattern to them. And there's a lot that election officials can do ahead of time to pre-bunk those lies about the elections. They should be doing as much as they can. I have to be clear, they're overstretched. There's no question about it. They don't have enough resources. But doing as much as they can ahead of time to make sure that the public is aware of the security measures that are in place will make it easier to defeat the false claims that we're likely to see from AI, but frankly elsewhere, about the way our elections run. In terms of the public, the most important thing we can do is go to trusted sources of election information. That means going to election officials themselves, and it means going to other sites that have accurate information about elections. And if you see something about elections that doesn't come from one of those sources, particularly, I would say, if it seems to confirm for you your kind of political biases, before going around and retweeting or spreading that information, just double check it. Double check it with official sources like election offices, like state government, to find out whether or not it's actually accurate. Because the potential is that we spread inaccurate information to our friends, to our family, and that cycle unfortunately helps the bad guys who are attempting to undermine confidence in our system.